You're invited to a unique opportunity to travel through South America without ever leaving New York City. Join us on Monday, May 6th, 2024 at City Winery for an exclusive wine tasting event with authentic food and live music. You'll have the chance to taste wines from nearly 40 of the best wineries in South America, all serving 90 plus points wines. Explore the flavors of Argentina, Chile, Uruguay, and beyond in one unforgettable evening. Don't miss out on this incredible experience. Book your tickets now and get ready to savor the flavors of South America. Use promo code WeSip10 to get 10% off at wineenthusiast.com/events/sip.
Hi, I'm John Capone, executive editor of Wine Enthusiast magazine. And joining me today is author Rex Pickett, who wrote the novel Sideaways, that served as the basis for the award-winning movie directed by Alexander Payne. This year marks the 20th anniversary of its release, and much like Miles Raymond, the character he created, played by Paul Giamatti in the film, Pickett was an unpublished author trying to scrape by in Los Angeles when he wrote what was first a short story that blossomed into a manuscript, one that was soundly rejected by every publisher who read it. Then, that unpublished manuscript made its way to Payne's desk. When Pickett returned home to his rent-controlled Santa Monica apartment to a flashing message on his answering machine one day that contained the news Alexander Payne wanted to option Sideaways for his next project, he'd just had his credit card declined for a $6 charge at Baja Fresh. As you'll hear from Rex in a moment, the making of Sideaways might not have immediately changed his fortunes, but it afforded him 2 decades of traveling through the wine world and a vital role in the creation of a beloved cinema classic, as well as, of course, a good deal of malice from Merlot producers. So my first question, Rex, is I want to start at the beginning. If we go back 20 years ago, I guess maybe even more than 20 years ago, when you got the call that Sideaways was being optioned for a movie. It had not even been sold as a novel yet, but you got the call from Alexander Payne. Where were you emotionally and physically?
Well, emotionally, I was in a very bad place. So let's just go back to 99. I wrote Sideaways, and that's a long story in itself. But my agent went nuts for it. And in fact, my agent, who was at Endeavor, now William Morris Endeavor, Jess Taylor is his name, he had come out from a small literary agency in New York, and he had signed me for a mystery novel I'd written called La Purísima, which is also set in the San Ynez Valley. And he came out to Endeavor to be a book-to-film agent. I bring that up because without that, there would be no Sideaways. And so now I had a book-to-film agent at Endeavor, because I had no agent. My life was total shit in the 90s. And I now had a new publishing agent. So I'm feeling kind of good, even though I'm living on fumes, whatever. And he was really excited when he read Sideaways. And we went out to publishing. They all turned it down, and I mean scathingly. And film, you don't get rejection letters, but they all turned it down. Nobody wanted it. And 6 months into the submissions, my new publishing agent pulled it. Jess Taylor, my film to TV agent, he had a nervous breakdown and left the business. So now I'm nowhere. I write the novel. There's great excitement. The mystery novel, La Purísima, isn't getting published. Although had it been published, they would have signed me for 2 more books because they would want to buy a series. There would have been no Sideaways either. And he had a nervous breakdown. I was, I had nothing at that point. So I did get a new agent at Endeavor. There wasn't a lot of excitement, and I'm just sinking deeper and deeper into poverty and destitution. I'm living in a rent control house in Santa Monica, and I was at a Baja Fresh on Wilshire Boulevard, and my credit card was declined on a $6 order. I came home, and on my ancient answering machine, I saw 2, the letter, the number 2. I usually see 0, and I figure, okay, it's creditors. No, it was my new agent calling, and then Alexander Payne calling saying, Mike, I just, my agent said, Alexander Payne just got off a plane. Sideaways is going to be his next novel. I went, what? I'm like completely freaking out. These calls came out of nowhere, and people were screaming on the phone. So it took from the time it was submitted to him by Jess Taylor at Endeavor. So he also was at Endeavor. It took a year before he read it. And he only read it because his assistant, Brian Beery, read it and loved it and gave it to him with a ringing endorsement. So Alexander is hot after Election, the Reese Witherspoon, Matthew Broderick film. He's hot. He is getting tons of submissions, and because he does adaptations, not always, but a lot, he's getting a lot of novels, big novels, The Corrections by Jonathan Franzen, and getting big offers. And he reads this unpublished novel because Brian Beery, who doesn't get enough credit, gave it to him with a ringing endorsement. He read it on a plane from the Edinburgh Film Festival all the way to LA, got off the plane, went straight to a payphone, called his agent and said, I just read my next movie. I just read my next one. So that's the excitement. And it came, John, it just came out of nowhere. I mean, I went from the depths of despair. I was really nowhere. And to suddenly being hoisted to, I don't know, incredible heights. But the story has vicissitudes there.
How rare is it that an unpublished novel gets optioned for a film?
It is rare. It's really rare. It does happen because they'll get advance copies, from agents and whatever. But usually, they're published novels. It's very rare.
And can you take us back a little bit to how even the manuscript came about? Because you were first going up to Santa Ynez not for one.
No. I made 2 independent feature films in the 90s, took 10 years out of my life with my now ex-wife, but she's a professor at NYU, Tisch School of the Art graduate film. And we fell apart. My mother had a massive stroke. My younger brother took over her care, stole all her money. I had to take over her care. The 90s was a brutal, brutal decade for me. I had sublet my rent control house in Santa Monica, and I crawled my way back to Santa Monica. And, I always kept writing. Even though I directed 2 features, I always kept writing. And a couple things. I started going up to the Santa Ynez Valley, which is about 2.5 hours north of LA. And there was a golf course there. I'd gotten back into the game of golf. I'm pretty good at 2 handicap, or was. And there was a course called La Prisma. So that's the name of the mystery novel. And there was nobody on it. And it's hard. And I was like, oh my God, this is nirvana. It was worth the drive because you can't play golf in LA unless you're a member of a private country club. So I kept going up like every 2 or 3 weeks, play golf. I'd go midweek, and I'd always stay at the Windmill Inn, and which is now, by the way, the Sideaways Inn, and because it was cheap, and I'd need a restaurant, so I wanted a place that was close. I trundled down to at first AJ Spurs, which is in the movie, but then eventually Hitching Post, and then once I went in there, I loved it. It was kind of dark, and they had Pinots, and I'm sitting at the bar and there's nobody in there. Now you can't get in. And so there's that. And then I also was just very alienated, isolated, and alone in Santa Monica where I lived. But I was going to these wine tastings every Saturday. And it was my only social outlet, John. It literally, I looked forward to it. It was only $4. A rep would come down and pour wines. And I realized I always drank wine, but I knew nothing about it. I never got into the educational side of it. And there were people there who knew a lot. And I said, this is something I want to know. I want to know about it. And so I started reading Oxford Companion to Wine because I couldn't afford, the money these people had to drink, the high-end Burgundies and Bordeauxs they were drinking, and Napa Cabs and other things. And so it was a combination. And also I met a guy there, Julian, who was the main sales guy there. There were only 2 people at this small store. And he was a little liberal with the inventory. Let's just put it that way. And he liked me. And so he would open bottles. And so it's a combination of that and a combination of going to the Santa Ynez Valley. And as a writer, we're like thieves. We're always working. I'm always thinking about things. And once I started taking friends up with my friend Roy Gittins, who had worked on my second feature film. Gregarious, not totally like Jack, but he has that kind of bigger, larger than life personality. He's funny. And we went wine tasting and golfing for 3 days and 2 nights. He said, Rex, you should write a screenplay about this. And I did, but it didn't. It was called 2 Guys on Wine, and it didn't work. So I didn't show it to anybody. I was embarrassed by it. Meanwhile, rejection letters are still coming in from La Prisma. I still have hope, like Miles. I still had hope. I wrote a short story in first person from the point of view of Miles Raymond, who's Paul Giamatti in the movie. And it was called The Bullpen, which was our sobriquet for the little area that we did wine tasting at Epicurus, was the wine store. And I'm writing in first person. I have this kind of sardonic voice, and it, degenerates into a brawl or whatever. And I'll never forget this, John. I just literally stood up from my desk and I said, "Oh my God, this is the prologue to Two Guys on Wine. It's not a screenplay, it's a novel, and it will be written in first person from the point of view of Miles Raymond." And I wrote it in 9 weeks. So it built in me over 4 years. But once all that coalesced, and it was literally an epiphany, and to this day, I've never really had an epiphany like that. I wrote it in 9 weeks, and I was scared when I wrote it because it's irreverent, it's transgressive in places. But I think once I got my voice in there, me, I know you've read the novel. It's soul bearing. I wear my heart on my sleeve, and I had nothing to lose. I threw in everything in the kitchen sink. My novel wasn't getting published. I was dead broke. I was divorced. My modest trust fund had been completely stolen. I had nothing to lose. So that was kind of who Miles is. He has nothing to lose in a way, and that's it.
Yeah. So that mystery novel that's not published
Yeah.
is the book that Miles is talking about
Yeah.
in the novel Sideways. So the novel Sideways is essentially Miles writing the novel Sideways, or writing what becomes the novel Sideways.
In the later books, yeah.
Yeah. And what role did Richard Sanford and the other, influential winemakers of Santa Ynez Valley play in informing the wine knowledge in the book?
Well, after I realized that there wasn't just golf up here, there was also a wine region, it took me a couple months to figure that out. The first stop I always made, kind of just right out of the movie, let's take the Santa Rosa turnoff and, go to, unfortunately that tasting room. I was just down there recently and it's been shuttered and whatever. It's kind of sad. And I'd go in there and just be Chris Burrows, the guy with the hat is in the movie. So, he was hired. And I thought, what is wrong with this? You're in LA, which is an ugly city, and it's horrible and it's noisy and it's gridlock traffic. And within 2.5 hours, you're in this rural beauty and you're in a tasting room and it's just you and Chris. By the way, no tasting room fees back then. Now up here in Napa, it's 50 to 250 or whatever. I attribute some of that to the movie. And I thought, this is because my life was so horrible at the time. I thought this is so peaceful. And so for me, the marriage of this rural beauty with this sophistication going on inside that tasting room. And so Sanford was really one of the first tasting rooms I discovered. And then I realized there's the Fox and Canyon Trail. And, I started going wine tasting, which I always just thought there was something so bucolic about the area. But again, you go into these like the Fox and Tool Shed, and yet there's this sophistication, and that marriage to me really spoke to me.
And later on, the second book, which was initially called Vertical, which I think you're re-releasing. And again, I should mention that Sideways has just been re-released as a hardcover, which has never
Thank
been.
you. Yeah.
Yeah. And people can pick that up at rexpickettbooks.com if they want to get an autographed hardcover. The second book, Miles Raymond, is a celebrated author who wrote a novel not unlike Sideways that was made into an award-winning film. Where does that journey take him over the course of, now you've written four books from post Sideways? And I think, I'll ask another question after. But
well, wine is definitely featured in the books, but when I wrote Sideways, it was really kind of my story. It's, on one level, it is kind of a ha 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 comedy, but then go down another level, John, and it's really about relationships and struggling with, these decisions you're making in midlife. But you know what? Because we've also done the play, Sideways the play, which is a pure distillation of my novel, because I wrote it. By the way, just opened in Riga, Latvia. It sells out. So I'm so excited about that. But it's really Miles, Rex, staring into the abyss of failure. And that's really so I think one reason it's held up is because people can relate to that. If it was just ha comedy, I think it would have been ephemeral. I think it would have been forgotten. And so really the second novel, which will be Sideways Oregon, now, but, it's really my journey. I was a successful author and I was drinking too much and I was, I was debauched, if you want to know the truth. Suddenly I have I have money, I've got fame, and it's in the wine world. But I also brought in my mother and her stroke, which was from an original screenplay I'd written that was much admired, optioned 4 times, but never made. So I was able to bring that material in. So what starts out is it's basically Miles has been asked to be, the master of ceremonies at the International Pinot Noir celebration in McMinnville, Oregon. His mother is in a retirement home in San Diego, but she wants to be with her sister in Wisconsin. So Miles hatches this harebrained plan to rent a handicap ramp van, bring Jack, who's now divorced and on the skids, which Roy kind of was at that time, and drive to McMinnville, Oregon, en route with a pot smoking Filipina nursemaid en route to Wisconsin. It's a 4,000-mile actually road novel. All my films, John, are road movies. One's 1,000 miles, the other is 4,000. All my novels are road novels. Sideways, New Zealand is, Miles and Jack are on a book tour in that one. So I've always been interested in that. So what starts out as hilarious and kind of debauched and strange with this agglomeration of characters like Little Miss Sunshine or something, suddenly, I don't want to give it away, but it turns really poignant. And I'm very proud of that novel. So I'm really writing, not to be solipsistic, but I'm really writing my journey. So wine is featured, but it's really my journey, and I'm drawing from myself in this personal way. And when you get rejected, it's pretty hard. If you're just writing a cop novel and you're rejected, who cares? Just write another, I don't know, lawyer novel or something, or horror. But I write from a very personal place, and I'm not afraid to go there. And Sideways, Oregon is a very, very personal novel. And in fact, Sideways itself, I tell people, is a very personal novel.
You said this to me, that the Sideways movie feels more like a 70s movie than even The Holdovers, which was the recent movie that Giamatti and Alexander Payne reunited on, that was actually set in the 70s.
Right.
And I think a lot of that is because it is that road novel. It is that, like, it lends itself very strongly, even though it's set in, the late 90s, to that, like, golden age of independent American cinema, which is what it feels like. And the movie, to some degree, it feels even more than the book to be taking a little bit of aim at the snobbery of wine. Is
Yeah.
that, something that's a target of yours in the books as well?
It is. Let's go back a little bit to the 70s. First of all, it was Owen Gleiberman in Variety who wrote the article that Sideways was more of a 70s movie than The Holdovers. I think they're very different movies. Honestly, I like The Holdovers. I think it's a real return to form for Alexander. I'd say if there's a difference, and if he's listening to this, I hope he doesn't hate me, but I think in Sideways, if you look at all his movies, and I've seen them all, it was the one time he really let his hair down. Like Jack coming back naked, Miles drinking from the spit bucket, going back to get the wallet. These are iconic moments, even, and we could talk about the famous speech by Maya, Virginia Madsen, about wine. That was not in the first 3 drafts of the script. And, I pushed him. I said, she's got to say something, Alexander. And he wrote it, he filmed it, but they weren't sure about shooting it. Even the ending where Miles drives up and knocks on the door was not in the first 4 drafts of the script. He just gets a message on his answering machine, John, and then it goes to black and final credits. And I said, well, that's pretty bleak. Now, in the novel, of course, I don't want to give it away, but it's a much more romantic. And Alexander said it was too Hollywood. And okay, but in the play, it really works. And that's fine. So he met me halfway in about the 4th or 5th draft. He wrote with Miles going up there. I think Alexander, he's very faithful to my novel. Bear in mind, in anyone else's hand, it could have been 2 guys doing Jello shots in Cabo. That's how Hollywood is. I mean, that's how crass they are. So Alexander was very faithful to the novel, very faithful to the characters, to the dialogue. I think when it comes to an emotional moment, he kind of reins in. He holds his cards to the closer to the vest, but he still allowed himself to just let go in places. He literally let himself go. And it's those moments, like when Miles drinks from the spit bucket, you can look at it as, oh, that's just gross or whatever. But the guy's frustration has been building over his novel, over this guy. Bear in mind, Miles, is a moralist. He's trying to stop Jack from this train wreck. And that's the whole, we can get into the Merlot thing, whatever. He really is a moralist. But at a certain point, you can't stop certain people. But that moment, and this is what Owen Gleiberman said, when he drinks from the spit bucket, Miles is expressing everyone's frustration with life, with their work, getting into middle age, maybe not achieving the ambitions and aspirations they had in their 20s. Look, we don't all get to be, Kevin Barry is one of my favorite writers who's famous. We don't all get to be Brad Pitt. We don't all get to be Alexander Payne. It's just, that's how life works out, and I think Miles is a kind of an everyman in a way, but I think also their antics are, I like going there because that's where I find comedy. And it's also, in the second novel, it's also in Sideways, New Zealand too. I'm willing to take the risk to go to places that might seem unseemly or transgressive or whatever, because I find comedy in it. But you don't want too much of it because you want to still stay grounded in reality. And I try to stay grounded in myself, but I'm unafraid. I'm fearless when it comes to telling you who I am and where I'm at.
Yeah, and let's go back for a second. So Payne, he shared each draft of the script with you. He didn't have to do that, but
he did not have to do it. It's incredibly generous of him, but he did it smartly too. He didn't just do it out of just being a classy guy, which he really is. He did it because he was interested in my input. I mean, it's a very personal novel. He knows it. Here, let me give you one example. Well, after I read the first draft, which I was very nervous to read, I said, Alexander, you kept it in first person. So in a novel, when you're writing in first person, you have to be where Miles is all the time. You'd be breaking all literary rules. But in a screenplay, you can go anywhere you want. He didn't. Miles, if you go back and watch the movie, to your listeners, Miles is in every single scene of that movie. And he said, well, Rex, that's how you wrote it. It was kind of funny. I think he was really interested in my input. Sometimes I'd write like little dialogue notes and he wouldn't use those, but he definitely took my notes to heart, especially Maya's speech. That was a big one. And in fact, there's a funny story there. He shot it. He thought it was too sentimental. He thought it would date his movie. He said, it's too sentimental. It's going to date my movie. I got to cut it. And everyone's like, are you kidding me? It's like one of the few times a woman has an inner life, in the movie. And apparently, I just learned this recently because there's a book coming out by Kirk Honeycutt, who's a former chief film critic for Hollywood Reporter. He's writing a book about Sideways because there's a 20th anniversary coming up. We can talk about that. And apparently, Alexander, right up to the final mix, he showed Sideways in a private screening to Mike Nichols, the famous, director, married to Diane Sawyer, The Graduate and whatever. And apparently Mike Nichols said to him, just out of the blue, your film doesn't begin until Maya's speech about wine. I think Alexander went, oh, okay, I better keep it in there then, and that's it. Film is like that. It's a very fickle thing. And, but he wrote the script and he was very faithful to it. I just, I pushed him and nudged him in a few places. So.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you would nudge in that direction because, as you pointed out, it is one of the few, if not only, places where a female character, really has a role, and it's a pivotal moment in the film. Was this just a storytelling realization that you came through in the drafts of the screenplay, or was it something that you thought was missing from the story writ large?
Well, first of all, remember, I've written and directed 2 feature films. I've largely was a screenwriter before I wrote La Prisma and then Sideways. Those were my first novels. And so Alexander said Rex's novel was easy to adapt because he thinks like a screenwriter, meaning dialogue, scenes. So I don't wax on for 10 pages about the sky. So it's scene driven, dialogue driven. So it just comes naturally to me. I'm reading the screenplay. I've had a lot of experience reading screenplays, whatever. It just seemed like a big black hole with something missing there. I wasn't going to write it. He wrote the speech. He wrote it beautifully. In fact, when it came in the 4th draft, tears came to my eyes, literally, because a lot of people think Virginia Madsen's in the movie for half an hour. Guess what? She's in the movie for 12 minutes. She's in only 1/10 of the movie. And bear in mind, Sandro, not to get too technical here, because the movie stayed in first person, we never go off with Jack and Sandra. We never go off with we could, but we never do. So she's basically a de facto tertiary character. And she only has 7 minutes in the movie. But if you take Virginia's speech out, I mean, my God, she would only be in the movie for 9 minutes. She'd be a virtual cipher. And so that speech, and actually I was just down in the San Ynez Valley and catching up with Frank Ostini and Gray Hartley, and they're doing really well down there, and they told me that it's that speech which has really over the years has just kind of risen to the top like the cream, in a way. And it's I have so many other moments I like. I'll tell you another. So I agree with them, because it's the one speech. You got Miles's kind of convoluted, tortured speech about Pinot and writing and everything else, but she grounds everything. She takes the technical stuff out. She's also, there's something erotic about the speech too. I mean, she's kind of coming on to Miles. It's a beautiful moment. The music comes in at that point, and even though it's 3 minutes, 3 minutes is long in a movie. And if it's a very powerful scene, it can feel like 10 or 20 minutes. And that's why people think she's in the movie for a half an hour. But I dare anyone to watch the film and turn the sound off during that speech, because she would really become really not much of a character. So it's a huge moment. And I think the wine world appreciates that. I call it the wine duologue, because it's in the play, and it's actually longer in the play. And the women characters, by the way, are twice as big in the play as they are in the movie. They have bigger roles, and they have more roles. I mean, more dialogue. It's I just can't imagine the movie without that, because it's got heart and soul. You don't want just that puerile ha 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 comedy. You want heart and soul, and we do get a lot from Miles. When his book isn't published and they're on the beach, and he's just basically self-deprecatingly calling himself a loser is what he's saying. I'm a loser. And in the novel, he's more of a loser because he doesn't have a job as a school teacher. And actually, in the novel, it's not two guys sitting on a park bench on the beach. Miles goes out in the ocean and basically has an aborted suicide attempt, and Jack drags him in from the water. And that's in the play, John. And it is one of the most moving scenes, because it's heartbreaking and funny at the same time. So I try to do the heartbreaking, the funny. I do want to go back to one thing you said earlier about snobbery. Yes, I am very against wine snobbery. And I say it because I grew up middle class. Even to this day, I'm not rich. But, literature and film are a democracy. Anyone, rich, poor, we can read War and Peace. We can read Jane Austen. Seriously, for $2.99. We can go streaming and we can watch, I don't know, Lawrence of Arabia, Chinatown, whatever you think your great movies are. But we can't all drink a Le Mans Rocher. And so to develop it, but you have to be able to go up the ladder of movies and literature. I come from literature and film. You have to be able to absorb it. You have to take in as much as possible to develop a sensibility. But to develop a wine sensibility, it's one of the conundrums for me. You have to have deep pockets, which is why a lot of people start writing for wine enthusiasts or wine spectators. They can go to special. I'm lucky because of Sideaways. I get invited to things, but I wasn't able to drink those wines. I had to be, and that I guess bothers me. And I'm not even sure what the answer is to it, but the opening of my novel Sideaways, which is not in the movie, the wine tasting that goes, it really is about snobbery. And those guys, where I lived, I was in rent control Santa Monica, but I was right on the border of Brentwood. So you had these rich doctors and lawyers coming down, and they, they would. It was something. It was classist, and that bothers me. So I skewer that whenever I can. I always try when I go like to New Zealand. I try to find the small winemakers, the ones doing it for the craft, for the art. I just wrote a blog. You can go to my rexpickettbooks.com and read it on Ken Bernard's Ancien Wines, ANCIEN. And he just makes single vineyard Pinots, and they are just absolutely, to me, some of the best wines I've ever had. And he told me he could have sold out 10, 15 years ago. And he said, no, I'm not going to do it. So he's not doing it. He's got to stay in business, but he's not doing it for the money. He does it for the love and the art. He couldn't imagine giving it over to somebody or, whatever. So yeah, that's another issue that I try to, bring up in my books without getting, I don't want to get too political.
Yeah, the novel does have, the original Sideways novel does have the characters in the wine shop to kind of play off as the foil, and Miles is allowed to be a little bit more down to earth. In the film, he comes off more pedantic, maybe, than in the book. Like, he has the airs.
Yeah, that's true. And there, again, Alexander will hate me for saying this, but when I first met him, he hugged me, "You're the king." And he was so excited to make the movie. And he said, "You know what I loved about your novel so much, Rex? You remember, it's written in first person." He goes, "Your characters are so fucking pathetic." You know, and I think he took a little bit of an angle that Miles is a bit of a wine snob, and Jack just it's a shading. It's just a subtle shading, where maybe he speaks a little French or something at one point, or with a French accent. Yeah, I mean, it's so minor.
Yeah, I mean, we still obviously care for Miles very much, but he does, he has that role.
But John, in your profession, that we know a lot of people who don't have deep pockets, but they find a way to, they say they're just like me. I'm a Pinophile. By the way, that love of Pinot Noir is a genuine love. It just came from my friend Julian at Epicurus opening Pinot Noirs that I couldn't afford. And to this day, I have a great love of Pinot Noir and less so of Bordeaux varietals. I'll be quite frank with you. That's my palate. I love the expression and the range of it. But I think that love spilled over into the novel. And so Miles he represents one of those people who really, in the wine world, who doesn't have deep pockets, but he really does have a sophisticated palate, and he knows what he likes, and he can get suddenly, like I did on Sanford La Rinconada, Pinot Noir, until I found out it was 20% Syrah, by the way. But anyway, but I can get excited. When you write, you've got to get excited. You got to get enthusiastic. You've got to, look, Miles's life is such shit, especially in the novel. I want him to believe in something. So he's going to believe that his novel is going to get published, and he just loves wine. It's like kind of like his religion, his belief system in a way. And so when he and Maya are out on the porch and Jack is in, doing stuff in the back that he's disapproving of, he's actually very reproachful of it. He's connecting with Maya over wine. And what I find about wine, and for other people, maybe it's sports and maybe it's something else, but it can bring people together who maybe they wouldn't otherwise come together. So they come together over that. I wouldn't call it a low common denominator, because it's actually, but it is something that we can all, I could interact with people who I wouldn't otherwise be friends with. And I found, and not just because of that, it's because I have a genuine love of wine, and I wanted to get it in a novel. And, it really hadn't been, a lot of people say, God, this novel, how come nobody wrote this novel before? Guys going wine tasting, well, nobody really had. And, it kind of changed. Changed. You know what it did, John? I believe this, and I've heard this from other people. A lot of people thought wine tasting was only for snobs, or it was only for restaurateurs, or for, wine merchants. But no, it was for everybody. I mean, it made it popular more so than ever. If you go to the San Ynez Valley, oh my God. I mean, it's ridiculous,
Yeah, it certainly made Pinot popular. We kind of, glance quickly over the unpublished manuscript of your novel being optioned. It didn't happen instantaneously. How long did it take from when you got that, wonderful news, the elation of that moment, until it actually started shooting?
Well, for those of you out there trying to make it in Hollywood, this is what happens. So Alexander's calling, he's screaming, he's going nuts. I'm going to make this film. It's my next film, whatever. And he's got the power to make it happen. And so he options it. About 2 months later, it's greenlit by Artists and Entertainment. Front page news, Variety, Hollywood Reporter. These are the main trade papers for the entertainment industry. Payne goes sideways. $10 million film. I'm flipping out, because I get a certain percentage of the budget in my option contract, whatever. And it's going to be a movie. I mean, that is the holy grail in Hollywood. So option money is nothing. Yeah, it's nice. And you can say, yeah, Alexander Payne optioned my novel. But to become a movie, that's the holy grail. And then, so I go, this is great. We go back out with my novel, and they still turned it down, the publishing industry. 2 months later, after it was those announcements in the trade, which were in early 2000, I got a call from Alexander, and he wanted a wine recommendation, but there was something odd in his voice. He goes, and by the way, I'm gonna do this film with Jack Nicholson first. And I went, I felt like I'd been walking at a brisk pace down a sidewalk and just hit a lamppost. I mean, everything I'd been through in the 90s, which I talked about earlier, all this, finally, out of nowhere, this unpublished novel just, hits meteoric heights. And then it's optioned. Then it's greenlit. It's a $10 million greenlight. And now, no, I'm going to go make About Schmidt with Jack Nicholson. And as a filmmaker, you're going to wait 2 years. There's pre-production, production, post-production, publicity, marketing. I mean, oh my God, I just thought I'd been punched in the stomach so hard. And that's Hollywood. And you don't know after 2 years if the bloom is going to be off the rose. But, he came back to it. And to this day, it's won more awards than all his other films. It's the highest rated, film. I personally think, he'll hate me for saying this, but I think it's his legacy work, and I think it's his legacy work because he allowed himself to go places he doesn't always feel comfortable going. Like I said, Jack coming back naked. It's just such a shocking moment, but it's funny too, and some of the other stuff. But yeah, I had to wait another 3 years. But the good news is they got out of the deal with Artisan, which was having financial problems, and they did a deal with Fox Searchlight. He got more money, and then we went into pre-production, and now it was for real. But yeah, I just sweated out for another 2.5 years.
Yeah, and About Schmidt only increased his stature, and then as you mentioned, Sideways is arguably the pinnacle of his career. So
and and again, he would, he might argue that, but I think it's pretty much set in stone. In fact, Sideways was named by the Writers Guild as one of the 101 greatest screenplays of all time. About Schmidt is a terrific movie. Basically, what it came down to is Jack Nicholson came down in his price. So he would, a lot of directors like Alexander and other big directors, they've got a lot of properties orbiting them, and you don't always know that, and you may get you something optioned, but just go on IMDb Pro and see that they've optioned 20 other things, and they're, they play that game because they don't know what element's going to all come into a confluence at the right moment in a way, but that 2.5 years was rough, John. I mean, I wasn't 25. I wasn't even 35 anymore. And suddenly you've hit it, and this could be really big. And then suddenly, whoa, sucker punch. Whew, that was rough, man. But, there were a couple of other good things. My now ex-wife, who had produced my two independent feature films, Wonderful Woman, after we split up, she went to the American Film Institute to reinvent herself as a director and got into the director's program, which was very hard to get into, very selective. I wrote all her first year pieces. She was only one of 3 chosen to do a thesis film. It was an original script I wrote that she'd read. She loved it, called My Mother Dreams, The Satan's Disciples in New York. She made it. She did a fantastic job, started winning awards. And guess what? In 2000, it won the Academy Award for Best Live Action Short. And I tell you, I wasn't there at the Oscars. We won't get into that story. But I just fell to the floor weeping because we had spent 10 years making these 2 films in the pressure cooker together. It's not in the digital day, and the analog day was rough. And I just, so I did have, they don't give the Oscar to the writer, but in essence, we did win. And so, my agents were able to get me meetings, and I might have got a couple of small writing jobs after that. Kind of, at least I was back on the radar again, John. Let's put it that way. So that helped me through Alexander waiting 2.5 years, whatever. But the biggest fear, and I'm a catastrophist, and everyone jokes about it. And, I'm always, as Miles is, he's kind of a catastrophist. He's someone who embraces, failure, but tries to find the humor in it. I really feared that Alexander wouldn't come back to the movie, that he just would have second thoughts and new projects had come in, But you're right, About Schmidt definitely was a successful film. It won awards, and it gave him even more power in the business.
Yep. And after the armloads of Academy Awards and other awards that Sideways won,
Right.
your track record in Hollywood looked pretty good there.
Well, I like to say I don't want people to think, because I think I'm a humble guy, whatever. And, I live a modest life. But we did, of the 5 nominations we got for the Oscar, we only won the best adapted screenplay. So also that I feel like goes to me, but they don't give the Oscar to the writer of the source material, which that's an oversight. So with the short film and the best adapted screenplay, I like to feel like I'm batting 1,000, John. I'm 2 for 2, So, I like to say I have 2 Oscars, but, I don't actually physically have them. But yeah, I mean, it's really gratifying. And also, I think the Writers Guild Award for Best Adapted Screenplay meant as much, if not more to me, because that's your peers voting. And of course, it won every other award for screenplay. And I like to feel like, because it was a faithful adaptation, I had a little, as I say to people, because they don't know who I am, they often say, I didn't know there was a novel behind this. And I always say, it wasn't the Immaculate Conception. There was a guy who went up there, but I didn't just like sit in my, just like, 2 guys go wine tasting, I'll go up there for a weekend. No, it built in me over a period of 5 years. And in fact, the characters are actually, the template for those characters were in my second feature film. There were 2 detectives. One was kind of like Jack and one was kind of like Miles. A little bit different story. It was a mystery, but it was called From Hollywood to Deadwood. And it was a great script. It got me my first, professional writing job with Kevin Bacon. But the template for those characters, I look for opposites, John. Jack is the classic extroverted feeling type. He's larger than life. He's a hedonist. He's a whatever. He lives in the moment. Miles is the classic introverted thinking type. He's always thinking forward. What can go wrong? And he's tortured or whatever. And this comes from when I was 19. I dropped out of college for a couple of quarters, and I read the entire collected works of Carl Jung in 6 months, all 20 volumes. And that was a seminal moment in my life. But volume 6, Psychological Types, was the prototype for the Briggs-Myers stuff and everything. But he wrote a lot about introversion, extroversion, thinking, feeling. And so you look for opposites, because opposites equals conflict, equals drama, equals comedy, equals resolution. That's the formula. And once I had those opposites, and one was my friend Roy, who's from the South, and he has certain vernacular, I like to try to find a voice. What makes so many screenplays not work is everybody talks the same and sounds the same. Mm-hmm. I look to be able to differentiate character, and I put myself out there, and my friend Roy, who's very different than me, but we're friends.
And the film was a cornerstone of Giamatti's career as well. It certainly pushed him out center stage, and he's so good in everything he does, and he's awesome. But people will always remember him for playing Miles.
Alexander wasn't going to at one. So when he finally done About Schmidt, he came back, he wrote the script. He couldn't find Miles. And of course, there were now big actors I won't name them, who wanted to play him. And he didn't want that. He wanted to find somebody different. At one point, he threatened not to make the film. And I went, oh my God, here we go again, And then I got a call from him. He was in New York. He had a casting director in New York. So Alexander didn't get the money from Fox Searchlight. He wrote the script and wanted to cast it and then take the package to, a company and then have them green light the package so he could control it. And he got a call from, I just met this guy, Paul Giamatti. My God, he's our Miles. And I said, who's he? And I know film. I didn't even know who he was. He had American Splendor, which he's terrific in, a small little indie film, hadn't come out yet. He'd been in some other stuff, but yeah, Sideways took him to Himalayan heights. And I've said, I don't want to say that exactly, but because that's going to sound arrogant, but I really think that you could replace a lot of people in the movie and have a great movie, but I think Paul Giamatti is irreplaceable. And that's where Payne is amazing. He said in many interviews, he goes, he likes to be self-deprecating sometimes, but he says, I'm not a great writer. I don't like writing. And he has a writing partner, Jim Taylor. I like directing, but what he loves most is post-production. He loves editing, which I hated when I was making movies. But he said, the one thing I'm good at is casting. And it's true. If you cast wrong, you can destroy a movie. And he waited until, he saw somebody specific he wanted. And it was, they didn't go for the pretty boy necessarily, they didn't go for the guy who spends all his time in the gym. They went for a guy who's bear in mind, Paul went to Yale Drama School. His father used to be president of Yale and then was also the Major League Baseball commissioner. He has a real solid acting background, but probably, he would be a character actor mostly in Hollywood. But here he is, the star, and people, they remember him so fondly to this day. And I don't think Sideways is the movie it is without Paul Giamatti. And that is owed to Alexander Payne for holding out for that cast. And there's a lot of people, and I could tell some stories now, but it's going to alienate some people. But there are people who say, we'll give you $30 million to make this film if you cast Russell Crowe. If and Alexander, give the guy credit. He wasn't going to, no, I'm going to cast it with who I want to cast it, and I'll take less money, and I'm going to make the film I want. I believe, and that it's so rare because it's so hard to get a film made that you will just say, okay, I'll just go with, and some of these are good actors, but they may not be right for the roles, but you're so frustrated, and there's so much frustration in the entertainment business that you'll just say, okay, fine, I'll take Ryan Gosling. And I mean, he's a fantastic actor, and he's good looking, whatever. And, but maybe he wouldn't be right for the role. So Payne really held out. I don't think Sideways would get greenlit today with that cast because they were all unknowns.
Yeah, as an unknown, and Giamatti is certainly iconic in part. And for our Pinot Noir issue of Wine Enthusiasts, we had in mind to do like an oral history of the making of the film on its 20th anniversary. And we spoke to you, and we spoke to Alexander Payne, written by another fantastically talented Hollywood screenwriter, Todd Brilliant. He talked to Payne, but Giamatti, we tried and tried, and we were just told he doesn't want to talk about Sideways. Why do you think that is?
Well, I've tried to be 30% less honest than I normally am because I get in trouble, whatever. Think about this for a second. I don't mind it. I can go outside here in Napa, downtown Napa, which I love, by the way. I'm up here. We're doing all kinds of events and, with Sideways New Zealand, whatever. Anyone listening to this up in Napa, I'm up here. You can reach me at my website. Now, I love going in front of people. I love telling the stories. I don't even get sick of the Merlot. So I'm not recognized. But if I say Sideways, I'm telling you the recognition factor is pretty high, John. I mean, it might even be 90%. I mean, that's incredible. And I'm proud of that. I really am. It means a lot to me that you're remembered. I think for Paul, I talked to a journalist who interviewed him, and he used to go out to restaurants, and somebody, knucklehead, would send a bottle of Merlot over. And initially he was amused. Then he wasn't amused. And then some years went by, and I think he just, get that out of here, whatever. I don't think as an actor, he wants to be remembered for an entire body of work, but wherever he goes, if you take The Holdovers, for example, which was the reteaming of Alexander and Paul for the first time since Sideways, and I read all the interviews and all the reviews, you could not read one without Sideways being brought up. You couldn't read one without them comparing the two. And so I think it's not that he wants to distance himself from Sideways, but I think that I don't think he wants to be identified with one role, the way, say, Harrison Ford is with the character in Star Wars and Raiders. And that's really all he's identified with. I think he wants to kind of break that mold and maybe do another film that's going to, break out. Maybe they thought The Holdovers would be that film or whatever. But I'll tell you, sometimes you capture lightning in a bottle, John. And for me, I understand why he wants to kind of distance himself. He's not embarrassed. I just met him for the first time in 20 years, 2 months ago here in San Francisco. And we talked about Sideways and how it stood the test of time and everything. But I think he just doesn't want to be identified with Miles and for the rest of his life. That's the only thing he did. And I think that's an actor's thing. As a writer, of course, I'm proud to be remembered, even for one thing. I mean, it's clearly my legacy work, but even Alexander sometimes will distance himself a little bit, and that we're moving on. And it's if that's all they talk about, and of course they had to hear, why has there been no sequel? And so we get into another question there, and because it's Hollywood right now is in a state of total creative bankruptcy. All it is intellectual property cannibalization. That's all it is. I mean, every day I wake up, there's a Sideways sequel would be greenlit in 5 seconds with one phone call. I mean, in 5 seconds, and, whether they want to, go down that road, whether they want to repeat themselves, I don't know. But I think it's a case of not wanting to be remembered for one thing, but everywhere he goes, that's what he gets asked.
Well, maybe they just recast it with Ryan Gosling and Margot Robbie.
Well, yeah, they could do that, and I'm happy to write. I'm happy to write that, But I think, remember, like I say, when I go out into the world, no one recognizes me, so I can just walk to the post office. Nothing. Although I'm happy to tell people I wrote Sideways. But when Paul goes out, he's recognized, and people yell at him, "What's wrong with Merlot?" And it's like, it's I could see where probably after a certain time he wants to kind of, push back on that.
What's the question that you get asked the most often about Sideways?
Well, certainly Merlot. Do you really hate Merlot and whatever? And of course there's, I think we talked about this in another conversation. There's really three answers. There's the long, the medium, and the short. I've gotten the long down to the medium now, but I don't hate Merlot, A, and B. But at the time when I wrote the novel and I was up there and I didn't know a lot about wine, remember in 91, 60 Minutes did this totally false story about the French paradox, and it was just something a winemaker had said. Well, we French don't get heart disease because we drink red wine and antioxidants in it and whatever, blah blah blah. And it wasn't based on any studies or whatever. But 60 Minutes was so popular, people rushed to the liquor store to get red wine. Probably a lot of them were given Cabernet, too tannic. They don't have a sophisticated palates. They're coming from beer and cocktails. So they gravitated to this fruitier, more approachable wine called Merlot. And the industry, got onto it. They started to mechanize farm it, because you can grow it in so many, now I'm sounding like Miles, you can grow it in all these different places. And so by the time I was going up to Epicurus for those wine tastings in the late 90s, Merlot had become synonymous with wine Philistinism. If you were like, I love Merlot, they automatically judged you as an idiot, as a Philistine, that you knew nothing, even though, of course, there are great Merlots. And even though Merlot, who's hurt by this a little bit because Merlot sales have tanked, is people who make Cabernet because they need 15% Merlot to take down some, and they're having trouble finding the Merlot. So, if you go to the movie now, Jack is coaching Miles on this dinner. It's got to go right. He knows Miles is a wild card. And when he says, and if they order, if they want to drink Merlot, we're drinking Merlot. No. So what Miles is really doing there in that rant, it's not that he hates Merlot or whatever. He's trying to tell Jack, no, I'm a wild card because I am reproachful of you cheating on your fiance, and Merlot just got in the way. I mean, I'm writing a novel all alone. I don't know it's going to be a movie. I don't know this line is going to even make the screenplay. I don't know it's going to be uttered with such venom, but every one of you go back and watch the movie and think of his rant now from a different angle, that Miles is basically saying to Jack, I am disapproving of what you are about to do. And Merlot just got in the way, but it became this, I find it funny that it's become this meme, whatever. But that's the number one question I get asked. And then number two, the origin story, which we covered. And also, I get asked a fair amount about Maya's wine speech, to be honest with you. I also get asked that question.
Yeah, and I mean the line in the movie is like thrown away. Never in a million years would you be sitting there and think it would have repercussions for 2 decades and economic doctoral theses written about it. Because of the exigencies of the wine industry. But the groundwork was there, as you explained. Like Merlot's overplanted, Pinot's underappreciated. It just was a catalyst. Is there anything else? And that's called the Sideways effect in those papers and popularly. Is there any other trends in the wine industry that you think are ripe for a Sideways effect type turn?
I guess it's not so much about grape, because I still love Pinot Noir. Although being up here in Napa Sonoma, I've actually have a newfound appreciation for Chardonnay when it's done right and it isn't over oaked and that $5 KJ with wood chips or whatever. I mean, I love the wine. I think it's more about regions, about discovering a region, whether it might be Spain or Italy. I spent 6 months in Chianti Classico. Obviously, New Zealand, I'm excited. I was in New Zealand for 6 months. And yeah, 67% of the grapes are Sauvignon Blanc for Kim Crawford or whatever. In fact, I was going to put in the new novel. If anyone orders Kim Crawford, I'm leaving. I'm not drinking any. But then I thought, well, I don't need the lawsuit. But I was going to think of taking them down because they sell they make recipe wines, which I'm against. But there are some people doing some great stuff with Sauvignon Blanc there. Sauvignon Blanc in Casablanca Valley in Chile, where I was, boy, those I don't know. Maybe that's in some ways my next favorite grape. But I I don't know. I haven't gotten tired of Pinot Noir. I still find it to be, it expresses the terroir. So I think more about site. Up here in Napa Sonoma, I think about, like the Ritchie Vineyard or the whatever, I think about or Mink Vineyard, these little pockets. I think about site and I think about, so I'm not saying it's a grape, but I think it's a region. And I'm wondering if Napa Sonoma, because it's so famous, hasn't been undervalued. I know that sounds, kind of paradoxical, because probably some of the Napa cabs have been overvalued. But I personally think the Pinots and the Chards up here are undervalued. They're not cheap, but for what they are and how, and I'm talking about the small ones, the ones, Blue Farm and, Ann Muller, I forget her last name, and she's a fantastic winemaker, Kim Bernards and Julian Fayard. And I mean, these guys that are, and women who are small doing great stuff. So I think maybe there's a reevaluation of terroir and of place. That's what I'm thinking, and that's where the next novel is going to. I signed a post Sideways New Zealand trilogy with my wonderful publisher Blackstone, and the next one's going to start right here in Napa Sonoma at my favorite place in the world, the Vintners Collective. It's this old stone building right in downtown Napa, and they pour 15 to 20 boutique wines, but they have high-end taste. It's where I discovered Ancien, Julian Fayard, and other wines. And it's a bar, and it's a great bar. So it's different than going in and it's being put in a lounge chair and you're paying $150 and someone comes over with a scripted thing. No, everyone there is so knowledgeable. And in fact, that bar, the picture of it was used in Riga, Latvia for the set of Sideways there, which has been retitled Pelicans and Grapes, but it's a huge hit. So I know, I think to me, it's about place.
How did you end up drifting up to Napa after so long in Southern California?
I met somebody, became a friend, and helped me with a couple of things, and had a place up here. And because when I left for New Zealand, I gave up my apartment in San Diego. And San Diego, where I grew up, I left LA in 12, 13 to go to Chile, and I never wanted to go back to LA. I really, that city is brutal. I mean, I paid my dues there, and there's nothing in San Diego for me. And up here, honestly, they'll hate me in the San Ynez Valley. There is a lot of appreciation for me there, I will admit, but there's even more appreciation for me up here in Napa Sonoma. And I love downtown Napa. Yes, it is kind of, money's starting to come in and whatever, but I know it's very wine centric. The country, I love Northern California. I don't hate Southern California, but it's gotten so crowded and so congested and whatever. And I had an opportunity, and literally it's really that simple. And since then, God, I'm kind of I know I sound loquacious and extroverted, but actually I'm kind of a loner, and I've actually got a lot of friends up here now. So probably have more friends up here than I do in LA.
Yeah, it's and you feel at home there. It sounds like.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I miss the ocean. I've always lived on the ocean, but I've got the Napa River, so that's my ocean now. And it's a cool town. I go wine tasting every weekend. Try to go meet different people. There's a beauty to Napa Sonoma. I mean, San Ynez Valley can be beautiful, but up here, it can be the fog comes in wraith like over these mountains, and it's LA has a lot of Southern California has a lot of hustlers and people who are self-aggrandizers. Up here, there's more of a humility to people, I think, if I were to generalize. And I think there's more of a...
Probably only when compared to LA.
Yeah, when compared to LA. But even San Diego is, it's a city of, I don't know, real estate and, I don't know, triathletes. And it's a beautiful, beautiful beaches, but I don't surf anymore, John. I used to. And like I said, I like it, but I don't feel a sense of community. But here in downtown Napa, I feel a real sense of community. And I've been able to do so many events up here and tell the stories that I've told here. But
it's a good base for Sideways 20, sort of this year being the 20th anniversary.
Well, and actually, that's the title of the next novel. It's going to be, Sideways: The Return. And it literally is going to start the Vintners Collective. So we've come full circle to Epicurus. So it's a tasting room. I don't think it's going to degenerate into a brawl because I like the people there. And then there'll be a meeting between two people, and then they get on the road because Rex does, and he's going to head to the San Ynez Valley for a 20-year anniversary, and fictionally, but it's not fictional, and which is in October. We've got a lot of screenings coming up. I mean, this is interesting. We when Sideways came out as a hardcover, I wanted to put on a screening at the Sebastiani Theater in Sonoma. It's a 90-year-old theater, and they did not have a digital version of Sideways for commercial digital. Okay, not to be confused with a DVD. They didn't have it. It's Fox Searchlight. But it turns out Sebastiani Theater had a 35 millimeter projector. So we were able to rent a 35 millimeter release print, which was hard to find. And I told Alexandra, I said, this is a disgrace that there isn't what we call DCP, Digital Cinema Protocol 4K commercial version of Sideways. I mean, are you kidding me? There's only 2 release prints left in the world. I mean, there's Blu-rays and you can stream it, whatever. So he contacted Fox Searchlight and they did. They did that. It's an expensive conversion, but they did it. And now I can screen it in any theater anywhere. And I love to get up and talk and let people know that it wasn't the Immaculate Conception, that there was a writer behind it. There was a guy who was Miles at one point, which Paul doesn't want to be anymore. But I'm happy to still be Miles with my self-deprecating, more sense of humor. And I love writing the books. I love writing the characters.
So it was shot in 35 millimeter.
Yep.
How many prints are there floating around? Do you know? Like, not many, probably.
At one point, Sideways was in almost 2,000 theaters. So there were 2,000 35 millimeter prints. All 35 millimeter projectors have basically been junked. They don't exist. Junked. Sebastiani Theater still kept a working one there, which is, otherwise we wouldn't have been able to screen it. They only found 2. Because it's a huge storage issue, so they just get rid of them. They just literally junk them. Although Quentin Tarantino bought the Vista Theater in East Hollywood, which is a revival house, art house. For those of you who are under 40 or 50, that's what we used to see films before Blockbuster Video. We had to go out to these theaters. But he bought the Vista Theater, so it's one of the only ones left. There used to be about 40 or 50 in the greater LA area. And we're going to do a screening at the Vista Theater. And I promise you that Quentin Tarantino has amassed a huge library of release prints because they're happy to give them away when they're going to junk them. You just have to know who to ask to get them. But yeah, they only found 2 prints. And when they did the digital conversion, the original negative, they do it from the original negative, they found scratches and dirt. And I mean, it's funny because this is an iconic movie. So anyway, I'm very thrilled about that. So we're going to try to put on as many. We're definitely going to have a big screening at Sebastiani Theater on October 22nd. So just go, my website, as I've said, rexpickettbooks.com, and it'll be events and everything else. But we're going to there's going to be one in Tustin, Orange County. They want to do an event in late May, early June. Gosh, the Vista Theater, we're trying to still pull that one off with,
He's got 2 now, Quentin Tarantino.
Oh, does he really?
He's got the New Beverly as well.
Right.
Yeah,
which shows, I think, silent films, so it's a little bit different. But he, No, I'm confusing that with no theater, but because I've been to those theaters many times. I lived in LA, but he has a huge library of release prints, and but to show it with the original digital from the original negative, the quality would be so much better than a release print. Remember, these prints, every time they go through a projector, they get scratched and beaten up. So so when we showed it last summer, we sold it out. It was great. I got told a few stories, not many, but I got to sit in on the film a little bit, and John, I say this with all the humility I can muster. It still held up. It's still, people still laughed in the same places. It didn't, yeah, gas was only $1.79 a gallon on the gas pumps, but it wasn't dated at all, because I think there's something timeless about what those characters are going through, kind of what I was going through, which is heartbreak and failure and romance and, I don't know, outrageous behavior. We've all gone through that period in our life where we did things that maybe we regret. Not everybody, but we all, some have, especially when you introduce a little wine into the equation. And I think I'll give myself a pat on the back here. I think I captured that. And then Alexander took it to a new level with the film.
Yeah, as you said in Hollywood, the story is universal. It's relatable, in the way it's written. But so many times Hollywood, manhandles that, and he did a miraculous job of honoring it, and also, he has that frame that he's trying to create something timeless, and it seems like with Sideways he achieved that, and it is funny because Todd Brilliant, who interviewed him for Wine Enthusiast, asked him about Sideways 20 events, and all he said was, "I'm going to insist that Merlot be served." So
Yeah. I mean, he's funny. I mean, I don't think he distances himself from the movie as much. In fact, after he actually supervised the digital conversion. I mean, he was in the room with the guy. And I mean, this takes probably a week. I mean, they go frame by frame. And he wrote me, he just said, I realize now that this is a brilliant film. I realize why this is a brilliant film. I think I think he'll show up at some events. I just don't think he'll get on the train. Paul probably won't. But you know what? I'll be there, and I'll be there to tell the stories, and and I know all the inside, because I go back. I predate everybody, and I went through everything, including being on the set, and being allowed into post production, and having access to all the screenplays, and maybe one day I'll write my autobiography and really tell the story, because it really was a lot of ups and downs. That film was almost never made 3, 4, 5 times. I mean, never made. And you sometimes wonder if there's, like, I always think, in LA somewhere, there's 100 screenplays that if you put the right people together, the right configuration, you might have Oscar winning films. But for whatever reason, they just weren't made. And of course, now, like I said, we live in this creatively bankrupt time, that a film that is original as Sideways could only have been made because Alexander Payne pushed it. It's totally 100% owed to him. And whatever minor little criticisms I've had of him, just know that I come from this kind of critical background. But you're right. I'm so thrilled that, he was as faithful to my novel as you could possibly be, because you bring in anyone else, and I could tell you some stories where some people wanted him not to be so faithful and wanted him to take this out, or wanted him to cast somebody different. He really held to his guns on this one, and I think it's one of the reasons the film has stood the test of time. And that's ultimately what matters to me. Is it's not. I said this to a very famous theater director, very famous, but I won't mention his name. And he was one of the most miserable people I've ever met. And I thought, and he's fabulously wealthy. And I said, and I thought to myself, there's one thing money won't buy. And of course, everybody says happiness. I said, no, money actually will buy you some happiness. You can fly first class to New Zealand and, whatever, and go wine tasting. Money won't buy you immortality. You are going to die. And that's it. It will not buy you immortality. And I feel like maybe I tasted with Sideways just a little bit of immortality. I don't know, and maybe one day it will be forgotten or whatever. But I write, honestly, not for the money, John. I write to be remembered.
And it's outlasted most, certainly, and it looks like it's not showing signs of stopping. And we'll look for the book Sideways 20, reliving everything that Miles has gone through and you've gone through it.
Right.
Rex Pickett, again, I thank you very much for joining us, and
Thank you,
hopefully
John.
we at Wine Enthusiast and our readers and listeners will see you at some of the events and screenings this year. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. You've been listening to our conversation with Rex Pickett, author of Sideways. Rex is currently at work on the 5th book in the series. The original novel has just been released in hardcover for the first time to mark the film's 20th anniversary. You can pick that up at rexpickettbooks.com. That's Rex Pickett, is Pickett with 2 T's, and you can get an autographed copy there from Rex. All the Sideways novels are quick, fun reads, and they're well worth it for wine fans. Maybe you think you know what wine trend is ripe for the next Sideways effect. If you know, or you have a comment or question for us or Rex, email us at podcast@wineenthusiast.net. And remember, you can subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify, anywhere else in the universe where you listen to your favorite shows. And you can also go to wineenthusiast.com/podcast for more episodes, transcripts, and all kinds of extra goodies. See you next time. Until then, remember, Merlot is not a crime.